It is the first thing you look for. Before you step onto the boardwalk, before you unclip the paddle, before your eyes have adjusted to the green light under the mangroves, you are already watching the water for the animal you came here afraid of. The armored back, the unblinking eye, the prehistoric shape that hasn't needed to change in 80 million years. You watch the water and the water watches back, and somewhere in the sawgrass a bird goes quiet. Everyone arrives at the Everglades afraid of the same thing. And everyone is wrong. Florida has officially recorded 32 fatal alligator attacks since 1948. Not one of them happened inside Everglades National Park. Every death was somewhere else. A lake, a canal, a retention pond behind a subdivision. The manicured edge of a golf course community. In 79 years, the animal on every warning sign, the animal on every postcard, the reason your pulse ticks up when the water moves, has never killed a visitor here. The monster you can see is not the one that kills you. On the afternoon of August 24th, 2011, a 23-year-old named Jacob Olivier drove alone into the park. It was an ordinary Wednesday. He arrived around 1 o'clock. The way 1 million people a year arrive. No expedition, no crisis. Just a young man and a few free hours in a place the brochures call a gentle, grassy river. His phone pinged one last time at 4:45. Then nothing. His truck was found abandoned at the Pine Glades Lake parking area, exactly where a person would leave it. Dogs and helicopters came. For a week they searched the sawgrass and the sloughs and the endless identical green. Jacob Olivier was never found. He was not taken by an alligator. He was not bitten by a snake. What happened to him is stranger and quieter and far more common than the thing you were watching the water for. Because the real danger of the Everglades isn't a creature at all. It is the place itself. A flat, trackless, maze-like swamp so vast and so identical in every direction that an ordinary man can walk in on an ordinary afternoon, turn around to leave, and find there is no way back out. This is the park that won't let you leave. The thing that closed around Jacob Olivier covers 1.5 million acres at the southern tip of Florida. It is the largest subtropical wilderness in North America, the biggest mangrove ecosystem in the Western Hemisphere, and one of only a handful of places on Earth named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, an International Biosphere Reserve, and a wetland of international importance all at once. And even at 1.5 million acres, it is only a fragment, the southern fifth of the historic wetland, the Miccosukee and Seminole, called Pa-Hay-Oki, grassy waters. The name most people know isn't the old indigenous one. River of Grass was coined in 1947 by the writer Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, whose book made the case that this swamp was a river worth saving. A river, moving so slowly the eye cannot catch it moving, spread so wide it has no banks. That is the first thing the Everglades hides, that this is moving water at all. It looks like a field. Most of the roughly 1 million people who come here each year never learn otherwise. About 810,000 came in 2023, over 1 million in 2022, and nearly all of them meet the swamp the same gentle way. From a boardwalk, from an airboat, from the air-conditioned front seat of a car. Guardrails and gift shops, paved paths with interpretive signs and a laminated map at the trailhead. The whole apparatus of a national park, built to tell every visitor quietly and constantly that they are safe. And the statistics agree. By raw numbers, the Everglades is not a deadly park. One analysis of Park Service data counted only about 15 deaths across the entire park from 2007 to 2024, a rate near the very bottom of America's national parks for fatalities per visitor. Compared to the sheer drops of the Grand Canyon or the cold rivers of Yosemite, almost nobody dies here. That number is true. It is also a trap because it describes a park experienced from a boardwalk. It describes the guided face. It says nothing about what waits for the few who step off the pavement and into the grass, where the ratio of danger to distance changes completely. The swamp is not malicious. That's the part people get wrong in the other direction. It does not hunt. It has no opinion at all. It is simply indifferent, vast and patient and arranged by nothing but geography, in a way that happens to be lethal to a lost human being. The alligator at least sees a person. The swamp doesn't even do that. What makes it dangerous is not one dramatic hazard, but the ordinary combination of three quiet ones. Water that hides what's beneath it, ground that offers no landmark to steer by, and a way out that quietly rearranges itself behind a traveler's back. That last one is what killed Jacob Olivier. Florida is home to about 1.3 million alligators, spread across all 67 of its counties. There is water almost everywhere in this state and an alligator in almost all of it. And yet the wildlife agency that tracks these things records serious injuries as genuinely rare, on the order of 8 medically treated bites in the entire state in a typical year. The odds of a serious bite run to roughly 1 in 3.1 million. A person is far more likely to be hurt driving to the park than by anything they meet inside it. When alligators do kill, and 32 times since 1948 they have, the location tells the story. A 2-year-old boy at a Walt Disney World lagoon in 2016, an 85-year-old woman walking her dog beside a community retention pond in 2023, a 61-year-old canoeing on a lake in 2025, the pond behind the clubhouse, the lagoon at the resort, the canal at the edge of the cul-de-sac, the places that look the least like a swamp and feel the most like home. Never, in 79 years, the wild park. The only alligator injury to a visitor in the park's entire history was not a death at all. In July of 1996, a 7-year-old boy fell off a rented bicycle into a shallow canal along the Shark Valley Tram Road and was bitten by a 6-foot gator. His parents drove the animal off. The boy survived. That is the whole catalog of harm the park's most feared resident has managed against its visitors. One frightened child, one rented bike, one canal, and everyone went home. The reptile story only gets stranger. The Everglades is the only place on Earth where American alligators and American crocodiles live side by side. And in March of 2024, a capsized sailor was bitten, again not fatally, by a crocodile at the Flamingo Marina. It made the news precisely because it almost never happens. No American crocodile has ever killed a person in the United States. Then there is the monster the headlines conjured more recently. The Burmese python has genuinely devastated this ecosystem. In the areas it has colonized, sightings of raccoons, opossums, and bobcats have collapsed by 87 to 99%. It is an ecological catastrophe, and to a human being, almost perfectly harmless. In the wild, it has never killed a person in the Everglades. The only recorded strikes, 5 of them, were minor bites on scientists wading through the marsh handling the animals, and researchers rate the risk to an ordinary person as extremely low. 4 venomous snakes do live here: the cottonmouth, the pygmy and eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, and the eastern coral snake. They deserve respect and distance, but they too sit far down the list of what actually threatens a visitor. They are not why people don't come back. Every creature the Everglades is famous for, the gator, the croc, the giant snake, is a bystander to its own reputation. The park has spent decades quietly proving that the animals are not the danger. The danger is what happens when a person stops watching the wildlife, looks up, and realizes they no longer know which way they came in. The Everglades kills with sameness. Stand in the backcountry and turn slowly in a full circle, sawgrass to the horizon or mangroves closing in a few feet away, and every degree of that circle looks exactly like every other degree. No hill to walk toward, no distant tower, no ridgeline, no bend in a valley. The Park Service does not soften this in its own literature. It calls the backcountry a maze and warns, in plain language, that the mangrove-lined creeks and bays all begin to look the same. That is the official description of the place, a maze that looks the same in every direction. A person can paddle for an hour down a mangrove creek and pass 1,000 points that are, for the purpose of finding a way back, identical. The same arch of red roots, the same tea-dark water, the same wall of green a canoe length away on either side. Nothing to name, nothing to fix in memory. And so when the time comes to retrace the route, there is no route held in the mind to retrace, only an hour of green that all looked the same going in. Now add the human nervous system to that maze. When people lose every visual landmark, something strange and well documented happens to the way they move. In 2009, researchers put GPS trackers on volunteers and set them walking through unfamiliar terrain. On clear days, with the sun visible, people held a rough line. But on overcast days, no sun, no landmark, nothing to steer by, every single walker eventually curved back and crossed their own path, looping in circles, completely unaware they were doing it. They were certain they were walking straight. They were walking in rings. The study, published in Current Biology, confirmed what folklore had claimed for centuries. A lost human being, stripped of cues, does not wander off in a random direction. They circle. And there is a reason it is a circle and not simply a crooked line. Walking straight is not something the body does on its own. It is something the eyes correct, stride by stride, against a fixed point ahead. A tree, a ridge, the sun. Each step introduces a tiny error. A fractional drift to one side, and in ordinary terrain the eyes catch that drift and the next step corrects it. Remove the fixed point and there is nothing left to correct against. The small errors stop canceling and start stacking in the same direction, and a person who believes with total sincerity that they are walking a straight line is in fact carving a long, slow arc. Give that arc enough ground and it closes on itself. Most landscapes leave something to steer by. The Everglades removes every reference at once. No rise, no ridge, no tree line, often no sun, and hands a walker's own accumulating error nothing to push back against. Flat ground, repeating vegetation, frequent overcast and haze. A person who steps off the trail to get a better photograph, or to step around a flooded patch, or simply to stretch their legs, can turn around after 90 seconds and genuinely not know which of the identical green walls they came through. And the moment they pick a direction and commit to it with confidence, the circling begins. But same is only half the mechanism. The other half is that the way out doesn't stay where it was. The Everglades is tidal. Twice a day the ocean pushes salt water up into the mangrove creeks and pulls it back out. The water level rises and falls, and passages open and close with it. A channel that is chest deep and paddleable at the entrance can be an impassable mudflat a few hours later. A route that carried a paddler in can simply not exist by the time they turn back. The park's own trail names are confessions. There is a mangrove passage called the Nightmare which can only be traveled at high tide, and miss the window and a traveler is trapped at both ends. There is a canoe trail called Hell's Bay, named by the people who know it best, hell to get into and hell to get out of. It is marked with more than 160 numbered poles driven into the muck. Not decoration, but a lifeline. The only way paddlers can find the route at all. Take the poles away, and even the marked trail becomes unfindable. The passage out is not a fixed thing anyone can memorize. It rewrites itself on a tidal clock silently while a person's attention is somewhere else. Nobody did anything wrong. The door simply closed behind them, on schedule, the way it does twice a day, every day, and has for 10,000 years. This is why the flagship route here, the 99-mile Wilderness Waterway, is flatly recommended for experienced paddlers only, with most parties needing at least 8 days to cross it, in a place where a wrong turn doesn't drop a person off a cliff or freeze them, it just quietly keeps them and waits. And this is why the Park Service's most important piece of safety advice isn't about animals or weather at all. It's about disappearing. Tell someone your plans, it says, so that if you are gone too long and become lost, the park can better assist. The official guidance assumes as its baseline that a visitor will get lost. In here, getting lost isn't the accident. It's the emergency the whole system is built around. How completely this landscape can erase what enters it shows up not in a lost hiker but in two airliners. On the 29th of December, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was descending toward Miami when a small light on the instrument panel, a burned-out bulb meant to confirm the nose landing gear was down, pulled the entire cockpit crew's attention. All three men bent to the problem of a 90-cent light. No one was watching the autopilot. No one noticed the aircraft settling gently into the dark. It flew a fully functional jet straight down into the Everglades. Of the 176 people aboard, 101 died. The reason 75 survived at all: the soft muck of the swamp absorbed an impact that harder ground would have turned to fire. The mud that traps people is the same mud that night saved them. 24 years later, the swamp showed its other face. On the 11th of May, 1996, ValueJet Flight 592 caught fire in the cargo hold minutes after leaving Miami and dove into the Everglades. All 110 people aboard were killed. But it is what happened after that tells the real story of this place. The DC-9 did not crash so much as vanish. It struck the deep sawgrass marsh and disintegrated, and the marsh took it in, the fuselage, the engines, the people, down into water and muck that closed over the top. Recovery teams in that heat and that mud were able to identify only about 40% of the aircraft, and roughly 68 of the 110 victims. Some were identified from a single recovered tooth. A 90-ton airliner and the Everglades gave back a tooth. Everything that swallowed those aircraft is still operating at human scale on one lost person on foot. Once the maze has a person, the swamp has time and it has help. The first accomplice is heat, and the danger isn't really the temperature, it's the humidity. At 96 degrees and 65% humidity, the feels like heat index reaches 121 degrees, and full sun can add another 15 on top of that. In air that wet, sweat cannot evaporate, and evaporation is the only way the human body cools itself. So the body loses the argument, its core climbs, and once it passes about 104 degrees, heat stroke sets in fast, scrambling the brain, confusing and disorienting a person before it kills. The very thing happening to a lost person's body makes them worse at the one task that could save them, thinking clearly enough to find the way out. The second accomplice comes from overhead. Florida is the deadliest lightning state in America. 449 lightning deaths between 1959 and 2007, more than double any other state. And out on that flat, open, treeless plain, a standing human being is the tallest thing for miles. In an afternoon storm, the lost person is the lightning rod. The third is the water itself, everywhere and never as shallow or as simple as it looks. Drowning in warm, murky, current-laced water is fast and quiet. Once water gets into the lungs, the airway seizes, oxygen collapses, and the heart follows within minutes, often before anyone close enough to help can even reach the person. There is rarely a dramatic struggle. There is a splash, and then there isn't. None of these is the reason people get into trouble here. All of them are waiting for the moment the maze provides, the moment a reasonable person is somewhere they didn't plan to be for longer than they planned to be there. The people this happens to are not who most people picture. They are not reckless. They are not unprepared thrill seekers pushing past posted warnings. They are, almost always, the kind of careful, ordinary person who fills these parking lots every weekend. In January of 2020, Mark Miele, 67, set out on a solo kayak trip into the Everglades. He was not a novice fool. He was a man doing a thing he had chosen to do, alone, on the water, the way tens of thousands of people do here every year. And then he simply stopped coming back. A day became several. Several became a week, then nearly 2. By any reasonable measure, a man missing in this swamp for 2 weeks in winter is a man being searched for in order to recover, not to rescue. What saved him was almost random. His phone and his wallet washed ashore, and where they landed gave searchers a set of coordinates. A direction, finally, in a place that offers none. They followed it out into the water, miles from where he should have been, and found him alive, floating face up, kept at the surface by the life jacket he had the sense to wear. His family called it a miracle. He lived because 2 objects floated to shore. That is the margin here, how thin the line is between the man who comes home and the man who becomes a 2-week search. Not everyone gets the miracle. On the 21st of July, 2012, William Crick, 66, was houseboating with companions in the remote Oyster Bay area, Deep in the backcountry, far from any road, a small boat had broken loose from the rented houseboat and was drifting away, and Crick did the most natural thing in the world. He went in after it. He dove into the water to retrieve it. It is the kind of small, practical decision anyone makes 100 times on a lake without a second thought. He began to struggle almost at once, and before his companions could close the distance, he slipped below the surface. They recovered his body the next morning. He was not attacked. He was not sick. He was a competent adult who entered the water to solve a minor problem, in a place where the water does not forgive a minor problem, and it took the few seconds it needed. On the 6th of February 2015, Frederick Thompson, 70, was canoeing near Jewel Key with a companion when their overloaded canoe capsized. 2 men in the water, far from help, in the cool of a February afternoon. His companion clung to floating debris through the entire night, hours in the dark, holding on, and survived only by flagging down a passing boat the next day. Thompson did not make it. And here is the detail that tells the whole story of how this landscape works. When his body was found 2 days later, it was about 10 miles from where he was last seen. He had not swum there. The current had carried him, quietly, steadily, through the dark and the days that followed. 10 miles through a maze his rescuers were still searching in the wrong part of. The same tidal water that erases the way out had simply moved him. The way it moves everything in here that stops fighting it. Jacob Olivier, 23, on an ordinary afternoon drive. Mark Mealy, on a solo paddle. William Crick, gone in after a drifting boat. Frederick Thompson, in a canoe with a friend. Not one of them was doing anything a reasonable person would call dangerous. Not one was an expert making an expert's gamble. They were ordinary people doing ordinary things in a place that treats ordinary things as fatal, and only one of the four came home. If the danger is this real and the place looks this gentle, why does anyone walk in at all? And why, once things start to go wrong, do so many keep going? People walk in because it does not look like a place anyone could die. Every instinct a person has for danger was calibrated somewhere else, on cliffs that fall away, on roads with traffic, on water that is obviously deep and cold. Those dangers announce themselves. The body reads them and pumps the adrenaline that makes a person careful. The Everglades presents none of those signals. It's flat and warm, green and quiet and full of birds. The boardwalk and the parking lot are right there. Every cue the nervous system uses to sound the alarm is missing, and so the caution those cues would trigger never arrives. People feel safe because the place is engineered by nothing but its own appearance to feel safe. Getting lost and dying in the Everglades is not a failure of intelligence. It is not what happens to careless people or stupid people. It is what happens to normal people whose judgment is working perfectly on the wrong inputs. The swamp doesn't defeat a person's reasoning. It feeds that reasoning false data, and the good reasoning does the rest. And once a person is in trouble, a second trap closes. Psychologists call it optimism bias, the deep, near-universal human conviction that things will work out, that the bad outcome happens to other people. It is useful most of the time. It gets us out of bed in the morning. But in a survival situation, it turns lethal, because it whispers the exact wrong instruction. Keep going. You're almost out. Just around this next bend. The lost paddler certain the channel opens up ahead, the lost hiker. Sure the trail is just past that next stand of mangrove is not being irrational. They are doing what the mind is built to do. Pick a direction, commit, and press toward the goal. But forward, in a place with no landmarks, is the circle, the arc the GPS trackers measured. So optimism bias and the circling instinct combine in something almost cruel. The harder a person tries to save themselves, the more energy they burn, the more water they sweat, the farther they drift from the path, all while feeling the entire time that they are making progress. The confidence is the danger. The certainty that a person knows which way is out is precisely the thing that keeps them from stopping, staying put, and being found, because that is the counterintuitive truth every search and rescue professional will name. The single best thing a lost person can do is almost always the hardest to make themselves do. Stop moving. Stay put, become findable, and let the search come. It runs against the optimism, against the goal drive, against the simple animal urge to get out, and so people don't do it. They keep walking and paddling, they stay confident, and the swamp lets them, right up until it doesn't. Someone reports a person missing, and help comes. The question is what it finds when it arrives, and how much of this place stands between it and the person it's looking for. When the call finally goes out, the machinery that responds is real and serious and often not enough. Not because anyone fails, but because of the geometry of the place itself. Start with the search area. When a person goes missing in the backcountry, rescuers are not looking along a trail or down a canyon where the possibilities narrow. They are looking across a maze that all begins to look the same, the Park Service's own words. With no high ground to glass from and no natural funnel a lost person would have followed, everything looks like everywhere. A searcher in a helicopter is scanning a green expanse the size of a small state for a single human figure that may be waist deep in grass, or under a mangrove canopy, or already beneath the surface. The terrain fights the rescuers exactly the way it fights the victim. The water is too shallow in places for boats and too deep for walking. The muck swallows footsteps. The tides that trap a paddler open and close the same passages for the people trying to reach that paddler. A helicopter can cover ground, but it can only see what isn't hidden, and this is a landscape that specializes in hiding things. It hid most of an airliner. A person is easy by comparison. Then there is the cruelest variable, the current, still moving the whole time. Frederick Thompson was found 10 miles from where he was last seen. Search planners have to account for the fact that the missing person may not be where they went into the water, that the swamp may have quietly relocated them, miles away, into a sector no one has reached yet. The cases tell the story. When Jacob Olivier vanished, the response was not casual. Dogs, helicopters, a search that ran for a week across the sloughs and sawgrass around Pine Glades Lake. Everything that could be done was done, and it found nothing. A 23-year-old man, a full-scale search, a known starting point, and the swamp simply kept him. Mark Meal lived only because two floating objects handed rescuers a coordinate they could not otherwise have found. Without that accident, the same machinery would very likely have found nothing at all. That is the honest picture of rescue here. It is not that no one comes. It is that once the sequence begins, once a reasonable person is lost, off course, and out of daylight in a trackless tidal maze, the help that comes is racing a landscape purpose-built to hide a body in water that is actively moving that body somewhere else. Sometimes, as with Mayele, a miracle intervenes. Sometimes, as with Crick and Thompson, they recover a body. And sometimes, as with the young man whose truck sat waiting in an empty lot, they never find anything at all. Which brings us back to that lot, and to him. Jacob Olivier drove into the Everglades on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, the way 1 million people a year do. He parked at Pine Glades Lake. His phone pinged for the last time at 4:45. And then this gentle, grassy, guardrailed place, the one that looks so safe from a boardwalk, the one where no visitor has ever been killed by the alligator everyone fears, closed around a healthy 23-year-old man and never gave him back. He was not careless. He was not an expert who gambled and lost. He was a person, in a place that looked like a park, doing something that felt like nothing at all. Somewhere out there, he almost certainly did what every lost person does, picked a direction, felt sure of it, and walked. Confident. Straight. He'd have sworn. In circles, most likely. Toward a way out, the tide may have already closed. That is the whole danger of this place, and it has nothing to do with teeth. It is the gap between how safe the Everglades looks and how completely it can keep you. A gap wide enough to swallow a jetliner and quiet enough to take one young man on a Wednesday and leave only a truck in a lot. So the next time you stand at the edge of a place like this, flat, warm, beautiful, with the boardwalk behind you and the grass running green to the horizon, and you feel that pull to step off the path, just a little, just to see what's past the next bend, ask yourself one question. The same question Jacob Olivier never got to answer. If you turned around right now, could you actually find your way back?